Hello everyone. Today let us learn about phrases and clauses. First, phrases. Phrases are a group of related words that do not contain a subject and a verb and is used as parts of speech such as nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, etc. Phrases cannot be considered a full sentence, nor does it have a complete thought. It is just a group of words. So phrases in a sentence at a it is just a group of words which are used as nouns or adjectives or verbs in a sentence. Let us see some examples. On the table, 12 dancing princesses. A boy. Under the table, under the tree. Bread and butter. So look at these examples. These are all groups of words, but we cannot call it a sentence. It doesn't convey a complete thought as well. So these are all examples of phrases. Now let's move on to clauses. Now, what are clauses? Clauses are again group of words, but the main difference between a clause and a phrase is that a clause contains a subject and a verb, and it is used as a part of a sentence or a sentence by itself. So clause like phrase, it's a group of words, but the difference is that it will contain a subject and a verb, and it can be considered as a part of a sentence, and it can be considered at certain times it can be considered as a sentence by itself. ഒരു സെന്റൻസ് ആയിട്ട് തന്നെ കരുതാൻ പറ്റും ചിലപ്പോൾ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു സെന്റൻസിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് നമുക്ക് കരുതാം. It can express a complete thought and it has a subject and a verb. Now there are two basic types of clauses. എന്തൊക്കെയാണ്? One type is known as independent or principal clause. It is also known as a main clause. And the second type is the dependent or the subordinate clause. So let's learn each type one by one. First, there is a repetition of the slide. Okay, types of clauses. There are two types of clauses. The independent or the principal clause expresses a complete thought and can stand by itself as a sentence. So ഒരു സെന്റൻസ് ആയി തന്നെ കരുതാൻ പറ്റുന്ന ക്ലോസസിനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. There was a boy, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ that is a house. So all these are groups of words having a subject and a verb and which convey a complete thought. So such sentences which can independently stand, such clauses which can independently stand as a sentence are known as independent clause or principal clause. There is another name, that is main clause. The second type of clause is the dependent or the subordinate clause. So what is a dependent clause? Dependent clause does not express a complete thought and cannot stand by itself as a sentence. So dependent clause ennu parnalum it contains a subject and a verb, but we cannot call it a complete sentence because there is certain kind of an incompleteness. So let us find more about dependent or subordinate clause. Yes, this is the typical structure of a dependent clause. It contains a subject and a verb, but does not express a complete thought and cannot stand alone as a sentence. The one thing that defines a dependent clause from an independent clause is that it begins with a subordinating conjunctions. So dependent clause came thodangunnathu it can exist only with the help of a subordinating conjunction. So let us look at the following examples of dependent clauses. Look at the first sentence. He was absent because he was ill. We can split the sentence into two parts. He was absent because he was ill, right? So he was absent is a clause. Because he was ill is also a clause. But The first clause, he was absent. That is an example of an independent clause because it can exist as a sentence. Now let's look at the second part. Because he was ill. അവന് വയ്യാതിരുന്നത് കൊണ്ട്. So from the sentence itself, from the clause itself, we can understand that it is not complete because of the conjunction because. Because in the conjunction നോടെയാണ് ഈ ക്ലോസ് ആരംഭിക്കുന്നത്. And when we read it itself, we can say that it is not complete. It is complete only when it is a part of the bigger sentence. He was absent because he was ill. When we join these two clauses, we get the full sentence. He was absent because he was ill. And in this example, he was absent is an example of an independent clause. Because he was ill എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് dependent clause ആണ്. Now let's look at the second example. If you take medicines, you will be fine. Again, this example can be divided into two clauses, can be split into two clauses. The first one, if you take medicines. The second one, you will be fine. So which one of these clause is a dependent clause? Yes, if you take medicines. So we know that this is a clause because it contains the subject you and the verb take, but this is not a complete sentence, right? Because of the subordinating conjunction if. So if you take medicine is an example of a subordinate clause. And the next part, you will be fine. So that can stand alone as a sentence. And therefore it is an example of an independent clause. So we can make sentences with both independent and dependent clauses. But dependent clauses മാത്രമായിട്ട് നമുക്കൊരു സെന്റൻസ് നമുക്ക് എഴുതാൻ പറ്റില്ല. Just think about it. If you take medicine because he was ill, ഇതിനൊക്കെ നമുക്ക് സെന്റൻസ് ആയിട്ട് എഴുതാൻ പറ്റുമോ? ഇല്ല. Because they can be used only as part of sentence and cannot be regarded as complete sentences. Now let's look at some more examples. The first one, the girl who won the first prize is my cousin. Now we can split this sentence into the following parts, or the following clauses. The first clause is, the girl is my cousin. Obviously we can understand that this is an independent clause. The second part, or the second clause in the sentence is, who won the first prize. Who won the first prize. First prize അടിച്ച ആള്. So that is an example of a dependent clause when it begins with a subordinating conjunction who. So subordinating clauses നമുക്കൊരു സെന്റൻസിൽ എവിടെയൊക്കെ എഴുതാം? If you remember the previous slide, we can understand that in the first example, subordinating clause was written in the second half. Second example, the sentence began with a subordinating conjunction or subordinating clause or a dependent clause. And in this particular example, the subordinating clause or the dependent clause comes in the middle of the sentence. So subordinating clause or dependent clause സെന്റൻസിലെ ഏത് ഭാഗത്തും നമുക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസിൻ്റെ മുമ്പേയോ പിൻപേയോ നടുക്കൊക്കെ ആഡ് ചെയ്യാം. ബട്ട് ദ മോസ്റ്റ് ഡിഫൈനിങ് ഫീച്ചർ ഓഫ് ഹിസ് ഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസ് ഇസ് ദാറ്റ് ഇറ്റ് കനോട്ട് സ്റ്റാൻഡ് അലോൺ. ഒരു ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസിൻ്റെ കൂടെ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒന്നിൽ കൂടുതൽ ഇൻഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസിൻ്റെ കൂടെ നമുക്ക് ഡിപെൻഡൻറ്റ് ക്ലോസിന് പൂർണ്ണമായിട്ടൊരർത്ഥം കിട്ടത്തുള്ളൂ. The next example, the old man was helping people who were victims of the catastrophic flood. Now we can split the sentence into following parts. The first one, the old man was helping people. Again, what type of a clause is this? Dependent or independent? Yes, it's an independent clause. The old man was helping people. Now let's look at the second part. Who were victims of the catastrophic flood? Now the second part begins with a subordinating conjunction who. And we can understand that the second part, who were victims of the catastrophic flood, cannot be considered as a complete thought or a complete sentence. but it gains a full meaning when it is part of the independent clause. So I hope you have understood the difference between independent and dependent clauses. Independent clauses are a group of words which contain a subject and a verb, and it can stand alone as a sentence. But dependent clause is a group of words containing subject and a verb. It begins with subordinating conjunctions like who, what, where, if, so that, etc. Because, but, and dependent clauses cannot stand alone as a sentence. It can gain complete meaning only if it is a part of or if it is attached to one or more independent clauses.